Well, as I'm standing out here shivering in the cold, I'm thinking about the soybeans that we're putting in the ground right now, that they need to be protected because that poor soybean seed, it's gonna have to face diseases, it's gonna have to face insects. In that cold soil, it's not gonna just pop right out of the ground. And even if it did pop right out of the ground, there are still seedling diseases that could affect that plant.
There are so many things going on as you're planting soybeans, and with all the soybean seed treatment options that you have out there, sometimes it gets a little overwhelming. You say, man, there's all these choices that I have. Let's try and simplify things today and make it really clear which choices are out there for you and which ones you should do on your farm. First of all, inoculant, soybean inoculant. I don't even know why we need to talk about it, Brian. It's a no-brainer. You should do it every time, every acre, no matter what. Even if it's soybeans on soybeans, there's going to be enough gain to justify using inoculant.
We think that's something you absolutely have to do. It's going to pay out for you all the time. Okay, then the next step up from there is using something like QuickRoots, which is a fungi and bacteria combination. It's going to cost a little bit more money, but usually you're going to get a real good return on investment.
Now, when I talk about QuickRoots, I always say beneficial fungi and bacteria, and that's a
point.
real big difference between some of the diseases that are out there, because the next thing we're going to talk about is fungicides that actually kill fungi, and you say, wait a minute, now you just told me to put some fungi on my soybean
or
seed.
live bacteria with inoculant, and now you want to kill it.
Yes, so there is a differentiation there. Now, a lot of the fungicides on the market work very well at killing some harmful pathogens out in your field.
And the thing with the fungicides is they're not going to pay off every year. So we usually expect some gain out of inoculant every year, some gain out of QuickRoots every year. With fungicides, we don't. So what happens with the fungicides is some years you're going to gain 5 bushels, other years you're going to gain 0. So what I'm trying to tell you is if you're in an area, if you have certain fields where you know you've got some issues from time to time, you probably want to be using fungicide every single year because you don't know if this year is going to turn out cold and wet, or if it's going to turn out hot and dry. You don't know if the diseases are really going to flare up or if they're going to be non-existent. So you got to look at the average over a period of years with fungicide.
The other thing you look at is previous history on your ground. If you have a high residue situation and you have a history of diseases, or if you have poor field drainage where your crop is going to be subjected to basically wet feet for a long period of time. Those are things to consider. And then also your planting date. If you're planting very early for your area, so it's going to be cooler, you've got a better chance that those fungicides are going to make a big payoff for you this year.
Okay, so we've got inoculant, then we step up to QuickRoots, then we step up to fungicide, then we take the highest step, and that's insecticide.
Well, we should make a comment here as well. If you're using live products like a bacteria or fungi, inoculant, QuickRoots, those kind of things, we like to put that inoculant on basically the day that we're going to plant, or just a few hours before it goes in the ground. We're talking about live bacteria you're putting on the seed. With QuickRoots, that's a dormant spore, so it has to stay in water for a period of time before those spores and bacteria and fungi actually start working. So QuickRoots could be put on well in advance of planting. Fungicides can be put on well in advance, and so can insecticides.
Yep, but the thing with insecticides is they're going to kill some bugs real early on, but what we're more concerned about is the bean leaf beetle, and that's going to affect that soybean plant once it gets up and just gets started going. The bean leaf beetles can come in and really do a lot of damage in terms of removing leaves, removing foliage, but the bigger cause of yield loss with bean leaf beetles is they can inject disease into the plant. A lot of these bugs, they carry disease with them. They're a vector for disease. But besides that, anytime you open up a plant and there's damage to that plant, it's just more likely to get disease.
Now, I know it sounds kind of far-fetched. Wait a minute, my soybean just popped out of the ground. All that I can see are the cotyledon leaves, basically the two halves of the seed. And a bean leaf beetle takes a bite, and now my plant's going to be sick for the whole year. But it really is. It could have a disease that it's going to carry through the rest of the year, and it's going to impact your yield, the quality of that seed, and then once that plant is kind of sick all the way through, it's going to have trouble with every other factor that you fight all year long, and that plant's just not going to deal with it quite as well.
Yep. Now the other thing with the insecticides is if you're using a product like Inovate or Cruiser Maxx or Trilex 6000, you're going to have some control of soybean aphids later on in the season. And that's where the systemic activity of that insecticide really makes a huge difference. And that's why we've been talking a lot about Inovate here over the last few months, in the fact that the fungicides, it's got 2 different fungicides, they're both systemic, and the insecticide is systemic as well. So you get insecticide protection, you get disease protection throughout the plant, and that's a big deal.
Well, it is, and all the insecticides, it's funny because you talk about 3 different main products, Cruiser Maxx, Trilex 6000, Inovate, and really Acceleron is going to have one of those components in it. But all of the insecticides are from the neonicotinoid family. So they're all from the same chemical family that we're using, but there are some differences. The 3 ones are Cruiser, Gaucho, and then the new one is clothianidin, which is the active ingredient in poncho that you may be more familiar with. And when you think about it in corn, we've gotten some pretty good activity out of poncho, so it is kind of exciting to now have clothianidin or poncho type product in a soybean.
Well, yeah, I mean, you're not going to see dramatic differences on the insecticide part, whether you're using the Gaucho, the poncho, or the Cruiser. But we do prefer this new Inovate seed treatment. Again, though, all 3 of them are pretty good. They're going to have disease activity. They're going to have insect control. The other thing that I would look at is I would talk to your retailer about this and find out what the respray policy is. Because with some of them, they have no respray policy. Some of them, you have to spray an insecticide post-emerge, then you'll get another post-emerge shot later on if you have to do that. But with some, and at some retailers, you'll find that the very first shot right off the bat, it's free. And maybe even another shot is free. So that's a big deal. In other words, if you spend, let's say, $9 or $10 up front, and you could get potentially 2 free shots of insecticide, well, that pays for that seed treatment alone, besides the yield gain that you're going to have.
Well, it could be a really big deal because with soybeans, you know, you just don't know. You say, man, I don't know if I want to spend $9 or $10 a head. So it's kind of nice to have that coverage down the road that, hey, if I do have a problem, somebody's going to help me out so I'm not spending more money.
Yep, and the way I look at it on our farm is if soybeans are priced where they are right now, when we're talking around $9 a bushel, I only have to have 1 bushel back. Well, do you really think that by getting beneficial inoculant out there, by controlling all the diseases and many bugs, you're not going to gain a bushel? You know, you got to weigh these things out. If the bean price was $4 or $5, I'd think a lot harder. When it's $9 or $10, you know, we're treating most of the beans on our farm, and that's the reason why, because the payoff comes pretty quick.
Well, here's the thing too, with the inoculant, it really doesn't matter. If you over apply inoculant, no big deal. You could double apply inoculant and you're probably going to see actually more gain from using the inoculant. With QuickRoots, if you overdo the rate just a little bit, it's no big deal. It's not going to hurt your seed. In fact, it's probably going to help you a little bit to put a little bit more on. But once you start getting into the fungicides and especially the insecticide portions, you have to be very cautious. If you way overdo those insecticide portions on soybean seed, you can end up with some issues, perhaps with germination we've seen in a couple of plots that we've done. So you do want to have those applied through a very good treater. Now you could do it on the farm yourself. You're probably going to spend $5,000 or $10,000 at least for a treater that's going to be able to apply them very accurately. Many of the seed dealers are spending $50,000 or more on seed treaters that do a very precise job of getting the exact same amount of insecticide in every seed. That's very important, especially when you get to those higher level treatments, that you have that done somewhere that's going to do a great job.
Well, once again, there are a lot of different options for seed treatments. We think inoculant's an absolute must. QuickRoots in many cases is going to pay, and fungicide and insecticide, that's a lot more hit and miss, but you kind of have to look at the average, what the soybean price is, and what your odds are for good return on investment.
All these seed treatments are great, but they don't control our weed of the week. We'll show you what does coming up later in the show.